Wiskott-Aldrich syndrome is an X-linked recessive immunodeficiency disease caused by a mutation in the WAS gene. As a result of this mutation, patients with Wiskott-Aldrich syndrome present with symptoms such as eczema, recurrent infections, and thrombocytopenia. There are a few facts you need to remember about Wiskott-Aldrich syndrome, so I'll share my visual mnemonic to help you remember all the information you need for test day. Let's set the scene. We're inside a fancy whiskey bar. First, take a look at this giant bottle of whiskey. The whiskey is here to remind us of Wiskott-Aldrich syndrome, the star of our video. Since whiskey sounds like Wiskott, we have whiskey for Wiskott-Aldrich syndrome. Get it? Now the tray for this whiskey bottle appears to have been bumped into, but we'll get back to this in a moment. For now, just remember this whiskey in a whiskey bar to anchor yourself to this scene about Wiskott-Aldrich syndrome. Aha! So that's why the tray was falling over. It seems like one of our fancy old patrons at the bar might have had a bit too much whiskey to drink. Notice how this old guy has bumped into the serving tray with his cane. Wait, a cane? Isn't a cane our symbol for immunodeficiency? Since both describe a situation where a person is weak, right? This cane is obviously here to help you remember that Wiskott-Aldrich syndrome is an immunodeficiency, and patients with the disease therefore have a depressed immune system and are extra prone to infection. We'll get back to the details later. Let's first talk about the cause of this immunodeficiency. So we know the gene affected is on the X chromosome, but what gene exactly is affected? Well, look no further than the plate of wasabi peas that was also knocked over to the ground. I guess our customer ordered wasabi peas and whiskey at the bar. I bet wasabi peas are a great snack pairing with whiskeys. By the way, these falling wasabi peas helps me remember that the WAS gene is mutated in Wiskott-Aldrich syndrome. Wasabi for the WAS gene. Get it? Wiskott-Aldrich syndrome is caused by a mutation in the WAS gene. But to be frank, you don't really need a memory hook for this. I mean, the letters WAS literally stand for Wiskott-Aldrich syndrome. A mutation in the WAS gene messes up the WAS protein, which is important in the reorganization of the actin cytoskeleton in hematopoietic stem cells. In other words, this protein is critical for the cells that eventually make up all the parts of our blood. So when WAS is mutated, we impair the function of these blood cell progenitors, which translates to impairments in white blood cells and platelets, causing immunodeficiency and all the other findings we'll talk about. Now that we're talking about the WAS gene, let's talk about how the disease is inherited. Notice the folding tray the whiskey is sitting on. You know how bars always have these X-shaped folding trays to serve stuff on? By the way, this X-shaped folding tray reminds me of X-linked recessive inheritance. X-shaped for X-linked inheritance. Easy. And obviously, we're talking about this since Wiskott-Aldrich syndrome is inherited in an X-linked recessive pattern, meaning that it gets passed down through the X chromosome. If you recall anything from intragenetics, you would know that X-linked recessive diseases are more common in males. That's because men only get one copy of the chromosome, while women get two. While only one copy of WAS needs to get mutated in men to acquire the disease, women need both copies to have mutations before they get the disease. The real takeaway is that this X-linked recessive inheritance makes it almost certain that your vignettes on Wiskott-Aldrich will describe a male patient. If you like, you can use the stereotype that men like whiskey to peg this fact. Got that? Let's move on. All right, back to our customer. Notice how this old guy is coughing. I guess that's why he's bumped into the tray. This old guy appears to be sick. Speaking of getting sick, one classic hallmark of Wiskott-Aldrich syndrome is recurrent infections. You already know that Wiskott-Aldrich syndrome causes immunodeficiency, so it makes sense that people with Wiskott-Aldrich will be more prone to infections, since their immune system is less effective at fighting off microbes. More specifically, patients with Wiskott-Aldrich develop recurrent pyogenic infections, or pus-producing infections. This stuff is pretty obvious, so I'm just going to move on. Okay, now take a look at the red pouch the whiskey came from. You know it's a fancy whiskey when it comes out of a red pouch. Well, this red pouch covering our whiskey bottle also reminds me of eczema. Since eczema is basically red, itchy patches of skin, and skin kind of covers our body, kind of like how this red pouch covers the whiskey bottle. A red pouch covering for eczema, get it? Eczema is actually another hallmark symptom of Wiskott-Aldrich syndrome that is high yield to remember on test day. Finally, notice the plate our wasabi peas were served on, which is also falling on the ground. By the way, this falling plate is our symbol for falling platelet counts, or thrombocytopenia. Since plate and platelet sound similar, this fallen broken plate should help you remember that platelets suffer quantitative and qualitative dysfunction in this disease. In other words, not only are platelet counts low, the remaining platelets also don't function correctly. This makes Wiskott-Aldrich patients prone to bleeding, since platelets are important in the initial formation of a platelet plug in response to bleeding. Okay, before we wrap up, let me touch on one last low-yield fact. Wiskott-Aldrich syndrome has been observed to cause increased circulating IgE and IgA levels and decreased or normal levels of circulating IgG. The mechanism behind this is complicated and has to do with changes in B-cell class switching as a result of WAS mutations. I wouldn't memorize this fact, not only because it's hard, but also because it doesn't matter. It is almost impossible for a test writer to get you to Wiskott-Aldrich using immunoglobulin levels alone. I would pay far more attention to the WAS gene, thrombocytopenia, eczema, and immunodeficiency, as that is how they will get you 99% of the time. Alright, that's it for Wiskott-Aldrich syndrome. Let's recap quickly and get out of here. Wiskott-Aldrich syndrome is an X-linked recessive immunodeficiency. It's caused by a mutation in the WAS gene, which stands for Wiskott-Aldrich syndrome gene. This mutation results in problems with cytoskeleton reorganization in leukocytes and platelets. As a result, patients with Wiskott-Aldrich syndrome get recurrent infections, eczema, and thrombocytopenia. Phew, now we're actually done with Wiskott-Aldrich syndrome. No more whiskey for you. You've got studying to do. I'll catch you in the next one.